Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Jess Todtfeld. Jess is an expert when it comes to presentation and media. Every single day, Jeff shows executives and C-suite leaders how to be magnetic, how to gain confidence quickly, and the skills that it takes to master speeches and presentations and media interviews. Jess is a person that has more than 17 years as a communications trainer and consultant. He's worked with big companies like Jaguar, Land Rover, the North Face, and he's also consulted with the United Nations. He has over 13 years of experience as a TV producer for NBC, ABC, and Fox. He's booked and produced over 5,000 segments. So this man knows what he's talking about when it comes to presentations, storytelling, and media. His time has included time in media, has included time in front of the camera, featured as a reporter, and guest spots in national and international news programs. He's hosted a show called America's Premier Experts and Times Square Today. You want to listen in about a story related to Times Square coming up in just a couple of minutes. And as we talk about in the first part of our conversation, Jess actually set a Guinness Book of World Records. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records for being interviewed the most times in 24 hours. He was interviewed 112 times, 112 different interviews on radio over a 24-hour period. I'll let him tell more of the story as he's an expert at doing. So I think you're really going to like this episode because he talks a lot about how important it is to have storytelling as a key skill when it comes to leading your company, because you're storytelling in front of your customers, in front of your prospects, up on stage, in media outlets, on podcasts, is such a crucial part of getting out and helping people understand what you do, why you do it, and why the work you do for your potential customers is so important. A couple of the key things that we talked about is how to be specific and memorable in your storytelling. We talked about how to avoid what he calls data dump when it comes to sharing stories and case studies with your customers. He also shared his storytelling framework, which includes how to use examples and how you use those examples to emphasize key points that you want to deliver to your audience. We also talked about the logistics that it takes and how to think about public relations. It's one thing to just go hire some PR agency and pay them thousands and thousands of dollars to help you get spots on stage or spots on media or spots in different blog posts. It's a totally different and more important aspect to think about how do you use those PR agencies for key outcomes. What specifically do you want to get from those interviews and media spots and public relations? What are going to be your calls to action? Where is the audience going to be? So Jess talks through every little bit of the details that it takes to use those investments that you might be doing in public relations and in marketing the right way. So really thrilled to have Jess on the show. He comes to us as an expert. He's a great personality. I think you'll enjoy the stories that he weaves into our conversation because that's what he does. And also how he broke down some of the stories that he used at sort of a meta level when I asked him, hey, you told the story. Tell me why you told the story and how you told it. I think you'll get a lot out of this conversation with Jess. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Jess Todtfeld. Jess, how are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm great.
It's so good to see you. I love the background. I love the setup that you've got going on in your office.
Thank you very much. I was ready before COVID with all the backgrounds as a media and a guy who's been in the media and helps people with that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's one of the main reasons I wanted to have you here on the show, because you've got so much expertise, including a Guinness Book of World Record I want to ask you about in just a moment. Before we get into all of that, love to have you, in your own words, share a little bit about who is Jess Todtfeld, what do you do, who do you help? Tell the folks listening why they should be listening to us right now.
I'm going to start from when I was a fetus and work to the present. Do we
That's
have
great,
enough?
man.
Well,
just
okay,
good.
good.
People can just go 2x speed on that podcast.
That's the truth. That's the truth. No, I'll jump to the most important pieces, and I'll give a little background, which is I help people with media interviews and presentations. I help them to get more business or build their brand, or I like to say save the world. However that ends up falling for them, whether it falls in the arena of media or speaking and presentations, I help them. And I'm a former TV producer. I did that for 13 years, national level. I've actually done some on-air work as well as a reporter and as a host. And you did mention the Guinness Record. So while promoting a book about business speaking, I ended up setting that Guinness Record a little over a decade ago now. So I hold it for a while, which is most interviews in 24 hours.
So as most radio interviews, the number I have is 112 different interviews on radio over a 24-hour period. Is that right?
Exactly. It was before Zoom. It was 2009. So we didn't have that. And so we did it on radio. And nowadays there's so many podcasts and other ways we probably could have done it. It was a whole lot of fun, but I got to practice what I preach, meaning communication skills and showing people. Was I selling? Yes, I was selling a book at the time. Did I want something more? I wanted people to know about us and reach out or get on an email list, all those things. But it was a whole lot of fun. And now I get to talk about it forever.
Well, yeah,
my
exactly.
wife likes it or not.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, remember back in 2009?
Exactly.
So I have to ask, just out of personal curiosity, how long logistically did it take to set those up so that you could just go boom, 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 boom? I'm assuming you just went straight, maybe had a nap or something in there, but like, especially back then where you couldn't just like go Zoom to Zoom. It's probably faster back then than it is with Zoom nowadays. But
right.
How long did it take to set those interviews up so that you knew where to go and have one lined up right after the next?
It was about 2.5, 3 months. Okay. And we had other people on our team, maybe there were about 5 of us, who each day, as a piece of our day, we would send out emails or phone calls and add new stations. And the old record was 72 stations. And by the way, if they simulcast to 1,000 stations or more, which some of them did, it only counted as one. Mm-hmm. But it took a few months. That was actually where the heaviest work was. Staying up all night just required the right amount of Starbucks. And then, we did the interviews. That part was fun. But yeah, look, like anything that we do, we have to put some planning into it. Got to think it through. We got to think about how we leverage it and use it, that one day in 2000, so you can use this interview forever, that I'd be talking about it. You got to think ahead.
Well, there's obviously a lot of thought that went into using media as a way to promote the book, because like you said, it was really before podcasts and Zoom and those sorts of things. And you've got, so much experience in the media production world. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is to talk about this concept, if you will, of media and why it's so important, particularly for a startup founder. And it may not be, I got to get on 112 radio interviews to promote my software product. The concept, the topic is so critical because at some point as a founder, you got to go out and tell your story. You got to get out in front of the audience that you want to get in front of. And so I'd love to hear a little bit, just, as a starting point for the conversation today, how would you first maybe help a startup founder who might not feel very extroverted, might not feel very confident to be either up on stage at a conference or get onto a podcast interview nowadays? How would you get them on board with the idea, like, you got to be out there doing some media stuff?
Well, the secret is in the word you just mentioned, which is story. We all have a story. We all went through some journey. It's rare that it all just fell in my lap and everything was so easy with no twists and turns. No, they all have twists and turns. And it's a matter of telling that story. If I hear a CEO or someone with a startup explain what they went through and what led to it, you see that passion come out. And if they can tell that story passionately and really have a sense of what they want to create as a result of any speaking situation, being on a stage, being with the media, one-to-one with an angel investor, or you name it, they need to have that story dialed in. And of course, there are other pieces to the equation, but that's usually where the biggest passion comes out, because they've been living it and sleeping it, eating, sleeping, all of it 24/7. And there's some really interesting ways to tell your story. There's some boring ways to skip over your story. Most people do that unless you go to dinner with somebody. So one nice thing for people listening is that we are all natural born storytellers.
Tell me
If
more
we,
about that.
well, if we go to dinner together, Scott, if you and I went to dinner later and we said, well, let's just hang out, well, what's going to happen? Scott's going to say, hey, what's the weirdest thing that ever happened to you when you worked in one of these TV shows? Oh, well, you're not going to believe. Then he'll say, oh, you know what happened to me once? And he'll tell some story. And then I'll go back. That'll be the whole dinner, because that's how we're built as human beings. We're built to share in that way. I mean, I guess the cavemen were drawing the stories on the walls. We're telling them on podcasts. And that's exactly what our clients, our prospects, the people that we're talking to one-on-one or one-to-many want to connect with. And really the formula for being on the stage, part of the formula, I'm simplifying it, is story point, story point, story point. You also have to have a point. What was the reason for sharing that story? And this way the audience knows why, or the opposite of that, which is you're making a point. And you say, for example, which I call the magic phrase, which gets you to tell more stories. And then people will say, wow, that really resonated with me on some level. You're hitting them on an emotional level. And I'll throw this last piece in, which is that stories are visual. You were really seeing what's happening if it's told correctly. We're seeing, if I were talking about some old war stories of working on a TV show, and we once had a show with hot tubs out on the street in New York, and we have an intern who couldn't figure out how to fill the hot tubs with water. And I had to explain, if there's no water, there's no hot tub, there's no hot tubs, and no hot tub show. That was the theme of the whole show. They were doing the interviews in there, and the entire, all of it rested on the shoulders of a 19-year-old. Go get that hose. Anyway, you're seeing it. You're probably seeing a 19-year-old who's like, this is just some internship, so I had trouble with the hose. No, go out there. Everything will be broken. They will harass me as the producer of that segment forever. So, and now if I were to tell that on a stage somewhere, I'd have to have a reason. What was the point? Maybe the point or the message would be about dealing with anything that comes your way. I mean, it's different for different audiences. How to just make things happen. How did we ultimately, it was kind of hard because one little garden hose, even on the street in New York City, doesn't fill 3 hot tubs very quickly. So it was kind of a whole issue. So the thing is, we always have to find a way to be able to have that message and have it resonate with that particular audience.
Yeah, I like the basic framework, like point story or story point, whatever order that you want to use, because it's interesting. Like, I think about storytelling. I think an example that I always point to is, you think about a politician that goes out on the political trail, and they talk about their agenda. It's taxes or immigration or this or that, and they almost always, if not always, they always go into, and I was just talking to Mary, and she's a single mom with 3 kids, working 2 jobs, and she's really struggling to make ends meet. And they always go into a story about a person, even though they just spent 30 minutes talking policy. And at the end of the day, the thing you remember is poor Mary with 3 kids, working 2 jobs, that can't make ends meet. Because that's, like you said, as humans, not only do we tell stories, but we receive stories, and that's what we feel like is memorable.
Yeah, that's it. And the key, one of the reasons to use stories is to be memorable. Yeah, we see politicians do it. If it's the State of the Union, no matter what president, they even have that person, they talk about a veteran who came home and this one program saved their whole family. There they are with their cute little kids. Like, oh, right. And it hits us emotionally. So, but here's the thing. Here's the reason to do it. And here's the reason to pay attention for everyone listening in right now, which is, we remember the stories. We remember you, and ideally we remember the message, and then we can act on it. There are 4 levels. I'll say it super fast, but there are 4 levels of being a great communicator. Number 1 is, people need to understand what you're saying. In the sales world, we've heard that phrase of, a confused mind always says no. And of course, if there's a problem with your microphone, however we're talking these days, or using jargon people don't know, you can lose them at step 1. Most people do it all right. They're able to communicate what they're talking about.
Surprisingly not, but go ahead.
It's a good point. I'm being really nice since
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I
who's
mean, a lot of times we use
listening.
jargon, especially in the software world or in a particular vertical. We're like, oh, we use the SOP for the BWC over there on the FBI. And you're like talking
You're
in
right.
acronyms, assuming that the person on the other side knows what those mean. And they don't want to say they don't know what they mean because they don't want to look stupid. So they just kind of nod their head and they leave completely confused.
And we've lost people at level 1, which is understand. And they didn't quite get it. Level 2 is remember. If people understood what you said and they remembered it because you use visuals and even speaking visuals, which is stories, they can move to level 3, which is action, that they can act on it. They can say, oh, I'll set up call number 2. And we have to make sure the next step is something really easy. Is it another phone call? Is it fill this thing out? We have to be real explicit. And then the last part is pass on to others. That's the fourth level. And we probably all had the experience, maybe even in our, business or personal life, that we had a sales conversation with somebody or any kind of conversation. We go back and we can relate the entire conversation, ideally tell the story of how they helped somebody else. This is how we would use it. Imagine it's like the game of telephone. Imagine you're now, everyone who's on, who talks to people and it matters. I call it business speaking, not public speaking. Business speaking is when it matters. And you need that person to pass it on to somebody else. So if it's like the game of telephone, they say, I met this guy, Jess. He does the thing with people with speeches. And well, does he give the speech first or he helps us with it? I can't remember. I don't know. He looks like Jerry Seinfeld. I can't tell. For people who could only hear the audio today, that's what I get a lot. But at least they remembered something. So the thing is, we want them to remember the right things so that they can act on. And I'll tell you this last thing about being memorable, which is when my wife and I bought the house that we're in right now, 17 years ago, my older college age son was 3 or 4, and he came around with us. By the way, this is a story and it has a point. All right. So he came around with us. His name's Sky. And he's a cute little kid. He had his lollipop that he was sucking on. We gave him a lollipop. He was delighted. So he wouldn't, give us trouble. He was going from house to house. And when we found this house that we really liked, the one we're in right now, I figured we need to be memorable. So I said to the older couple who owned the house and raised a family, and here we are, this kid, my wife was pregnant and we had this little baby. This little 4-year-old. And I said, Sky, we're going to leave you here to, warm them up and be extra cute. We'll pick you up in a week. And then this way they'll give us the house. So I'm saying it to him in front. And of course, he's looking at us like, what? And of course, the couple thought, oh, that's so cute. Guess who they remembered when people put bids in? They were, oh, you're the kid, the boy and the lollipop. And he was so cute. And you say we're going to leave him here. And they remembered all of it. We got the house and people were outbidding each other and all craziness. They're like, no, we liked you. So I share that, the point is be memorable, but I share that not only to tell a story, but to show you it works. It works. Be memorable in your own way.
I want to ask you a couple of questions, maybe at a meta level, as you purposely told a story to prove the point, which is the whole framework that you taught. And you chose that particular story. Is there a reason why you chose that particular story about you buying a house as a way to convey this point to the audience?
Well,
or is it
this
just
stage, I'm probably 17, 18 years into what I do. So I have a deep story database in my brain.
Okay.
My wife actually, sometimes we help clients to create story databases and create keywords that they can remember and all of that. My wife always teases me, I had heard that story, put it in, and I don't write it down. But anyway, why did I tell that story? I figured, look, we're having a nice, relaxed conversation. It makes the point. It's not, too over the top. I would probably match that next with a business conversation, a CEO I helped. The UN is a client of mine. I might explain or use an example of theirs next. So we're kind of going back, people buy people. If I were to tell this in a business situation, which I guess I'd really have to decide who's in the room. Mm-hmm. Does that warm them up in some way? What did you learn about me if I were selling something today? You learned I'm a dad. Hopefully I'm a nice dad or a good dad. We were able to, make this whole, they were selling us, but we wanted the house. We were able to, close and get to the close, be memorable. But I would go back and forth, and in certain situations, I decide maybe that's a story just too much about my life or little kid, and I'll bring up something else. Sometimes I'll tell you, because I guess what you're asking is what do we leave in, when do we use something or not do something, and I have lots of stories about CEOs and people we've helped. But sometimes it may even just be like a quick line. I was giving a speech at a conference on stage, and I was talking about sometimes we do something in front of a group and then we're surprised that it worked. So I was talking about, I think about how to use pauses properly. And I had a client who did it and it worked, but then they were so surprised they were just standing there, not doing anything. I said, that's like my 7-year-old who was on the baseball team and he caught the pop fly in the outfield and he stood there for an extra 5 seconds, like looking at his mitt saying, can you guys believe that it went in my mitt? And everyone was like, throw the ball. So I usually say, so jump to it a little bit faster. So I might say something a little bit quicker or choose the stories.
All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Jess Todtfeld. So look, today's podcast, we're talking a lot about storytelling and presentations and getting out in front of groups. Well, that's one of the things I absolutely love to do. And in fact, one of the things we've committed to doing this year as part of our work with startups every single day is doing more live trainings, more masterclasses, more workshops, more webinars. And most of those are going to be completely free to the general startup public. I'd love for you, if you're a startup founder, if you're a B2B startup founder, a sales leader, if you're selling to the enterprise, and you want to get some help understanding the selling frameworks, the sales process that you need to build, some tactical strategy, skills, and systems that you need to build and implement in order to ramp up and scale up your sales process, then I absolutely invite you to join me for some of the live events that we have coming up. The easiest way to go and find out where and when these live events are going to be is just go over to salesqualia, sales, Qualia.com. Right there on the homepage, you'll see a button that says live events at the top. Click that button for live events. It'll show you all of the upcoming events that we've got. Some of those are going to be online, of course. We are looking to do some more stuff in person as the year progresses. And we've even got some opportunities for you to watch recordings on demand or on a scheduled session. So no shortage of way for you to either get help from me live in these webinars, masterclasses, workshop, one-on-one, or of course to watch any of the recordings that we've done over the course of the last couple of months and years. So definitely encourage you to go over to salesqualia.com, click on live events, sign up for one or more of the live trainings, webinars, masterclasses that you see, so we can work together. I can teach you some of the core frameworks that you're going to have to build and implement. And if there's a way for us to help you beyond those workshops and masterclasses with our coaching program, we can always talk about how that works too. So that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Jess Todtfeld. Okay. And there's another part of the story I wanted to ask you about, which is you talk about your son specifically with the lollipop.
Yeah.
Now that to me seems like a very specific detail that you threw in there, as opposed to saying, I'm just here with my son and I told my son look cute. When you said kid with a lollipop, I got a different image. I got a more material image in my mind. And you can imagine the 4-year-old with the probably pretty sticky. It's on his hands and probably on his lips and, purple. I don't know if you said purple, but I imagine a purple lollipop. That's all purposeful, I imagine.
Yes. And yes. So one of the secrets for memorable stories is talking about some of the visuals, creating the setting of where the story took place, using dialogue. I said this, then the other person said that. And then I was shocked and I could see their face. You're really creating those visuals with all of these tools. I have a different business story that I tell. And actually I talk about years and years ago, I tried out a very unique type of public speaking called stand-up comedy. And in the story, and it was in a dive bar. Oh, it was terrible. People didn't know why we were there. They just want to talk in the bar. Why is this guy talking on a microphone? And I'm giving you the ultra short version, but this guy stood up and they're not supposed to stay. I mean, they had a few rows of chairs in this one spot. And I could tell the way he was holding his Heineken. It wasn't up in front of him. It was behind his head, up in the air, aimed at my face. And I talk about how he had this green woolen hat pulled down with this salt and pepper hair sticking out and a mustache like a walrus. And he was angry. He was yelling gibberish, should have ran. I don't know how to respond. What comeback do you have for that? So the reason why I share these details is just like the green woolen hat. I have groups that I go back to 2 years later and they say green woolen hat. And then the other people say Heineken. And I'm laughing because, and of course, new people are wondering why. What are they talking about? But it's a story and has a business message that goes along with it about being prepared for any kind of situation. But those visuals, just like the lollipop, create something in the mind of the person watching. And then there also needs to be a problem. So the problem was I was going to have my a beer bottle thrown at my face. And of course, with my son, the problem was, how are we going to be memorable? Of course, you also created another one, which is kind of funny, which is that he had the lollipop juices going everywhere. We're going to wreck this person's house. It could be a story with the opposite message, which is that, that's how we ruined it. Don't do that. But that's the whole point. We want to be, this is so, so important. I'm glad we took a little extra time to talk about being memorable, because we have to stand out. How are we going to stand out? And we've seen people do it in ways that just work. We've seen people do it with goofy bow ties. Nothing against the goofy bow tie contingent that listens to your show specifically. I don't know what I'm talking about.
It's a sub niche.
Exactly. It's this one group of heavy, longtime listeners. I was at a conference and a guy was dressed like Santa Claus in July. We remembered him. And it's been so long, I can't remember what his message was, but he has to keep that going all year long now. It must be tough in July. So we have to find ways to be memorable.
Yeah. And the Heineken to me was the lollipop in the other story.
That's it.
It was color. It added a specific set of detail. It had a beer even. It was like Heineken is a distinct colored beer. It's green. Everyone's seen the green. It's not like your standard beer bottle, right? And it could be anything. You'd be like, oh, he had the long neck Budweiser in his hand.
And if I said long neck Budweiser, we're like long neck, and they're going to throw it at Jess's neck. And, we're putting ourselves in the story. What was that like? And how do you deal with that? And now hopefully for people, whether they're on a conference call or they go to a conference, that nobody will throw a Heineken bottle at their face, but people do raise their hand and they ask questions that we weren't expecting, or they're the type of person that just wants to be angry. I don't know if I've had people on social media pick a fight for no reason. I mean, I was saying nothing controversial. There was some, I'm trying to remember. There was one where somebody just wanted to pick a fight for no reason. Yeah. And I said, thank you for the thoughts and being a part of this discussion. I said, I'm not going to argue it because let's have all points. And they didn't like that either. So this person obviously just wanted to, like, I hate all these techniques. I hate all sweeping generalizations. What's that?
Too many Heinekens, not enough lollipops.
That's what we need in the world.
More Heinekens, more Heinekens. That's interesting. So if we bring this back to, somebody's listening, they're a startup founder. Okay, I got to get out there. I got to be on media. And I want to spend a couple minutes on that, just a moment. How do you talk to them on inserting these kinds of memorable tips or memorable devices inside the story? Because like a lot of times, and I'm just speaking from experience, we work with startup founders and they say, I get asked about case studies. Somebody says, hey, can you, who else have you helped? What other companies have you helped? Well, we worked with this other Fortune 500 and they had the same problem and we helped them increase their efficiency by 33%. Now that's conveying information that the person asked for, but it's certainly not doing it in a memorable way. So you take like a very simple request, like who else have you helped, follow the very simple answer. What would you do or advise someone to put in a little bit of color to make that memorable?
Yeah. And it really comes down to the practice. Of course, practicing with a coach is even better, but this is one of those steps where people say we spend all the time finding the studies and the data and pages of printing it out, special fonts. and they haven't really spent a whole lot of time delivering it. And you're absolutely right. It's a two-part answer, which is giving the facts, and then the magic phrase, for example, explains some story, even if it's a short example of another company who used this information or acted on it or had another problem and you were able to solve it, that becomes part two. And I'll give you a quick for example, which is I had a company that was they were taking their company public, and they had this. I'm trying to decide how much information I'm gonna give on this particular company, but basically they had come up with this portfolio of farmland, and they were telling some interesting stories of how they got the different pieces of farmland all across the US. And I think there are some even outside. And of course, all the questions about what about drought? What about this? What about that? And when they told the stories mixed with images on the screen, where the whole screen was the amazing technology that's in the ground that lets them know to the drop how much water should be put out there so that they don't use too much or too little, and the amount that goes into reserves. And you see, when they say we have 300-foot reservoirs that are in the ground that have we're good for a 10-year drought. Like, whoa. And then you see it, and you see, the person looks like they're 2 inches big next to some of these facilities. The point was well made. So they're telling the story and they're saying, hey, when I was out there, this is what we saw. Here I am on the ground. Just like when we pull out our phone and we swipe through and you see and can experience. So that mix is really, really important. But you're right. What happens is people go into those meetings and they spend all of the time talking about the data. I have a phrase for that. I call it the data dump. Yeah. They just dump data everywhere. And, we could read the booklet that was handed out. We could read the email, but we're not getting any of the color that goes around all of that. And also the important examples. One is the data, but the other is, but how we're buying people. How are you helping us? How are you going to take that data and make it work for us, or act totally differently in another situation when it's me, your future client or investor, or you name it. So yeah, it's a skill that you got to practice. And actually for one particular group that was a startup, when they were talking about it, I would videotape them and we'd play it back, and they knew it. I didn't have to tell them how rough it looked. I'm trying to be nice here. It was not good. Everyone was dry, and they were boring, and they were passionate people. They were getting involved in this business because they really cared, and they invested thousands of hours of, blood, sweat, and tears. And as the day went on, and we actually had multiple days, but as that particular day went on and they saw themselves on the video getting better and better, this is a nice other piece about the style pieces, their style and the substance, that they had a new memory of what it could be. And they saw themselves delivering an amazing presentation. And then that became where they were pulling from. So it was really nice. That's another really key ingredient, the video camera, where people get scared. But when they see themselves improving, and people listening, when you want to see yourself improving, you can take your phone. You now have a new memory of what's possible.
Yeah, I really like the concept of the data dump, because there's several levels there, which is many times, tech founders in particular, they might be engineering background, product people, financial people. And so their nature is to be data driven, like, oh, the numbers say I should do this, and the numbers say I should do that. They build a product that provides these data. And so the propensity is to sell with the data, because look, I'm going to make a logical argument as to why you should buy this product. Here's all the evidence, Your Honor. At the other side, though, like you said, we're selling to humans. And so I love how you said, like in that story about the reservoir, again, I had this imagery, you're like, we know down to the drop. I was like, that's really specific. Or I can imagine that person that looks 2 inches next to that big reservoir. Now it's the emotional side that is the memorable thing, because there's all these data that's like, yeah, you're making this argument. Of course, your data says that, but it's the stories of what they remember.
Yes. And And again, it makes that memorable to be able to see it. And it takes it where we hear the data, but we know they're really doing something about it. When they say, this is how much money we invested in the technology that surrounds this, so this works, and that we're good for 10 years. Oh, you have a 2-year drought or 1 year, however long, you're good to go. All of that is really important. And people have to make a decision. How important is it to really reach people and get them to see what they're seeing? You brought something up, which is where communicating, this is that whole idea of what part of the brain are we communicating to? So when we're communicating to the thoughtful region of the brain, the neocortex, that, the data says this, that's not where the gatekeeper is. The gatekeeper is that reptilian brain or a caveman brain or whatever they want to call it. And I'm giving you the fast version on this, but that's where emotion is. I said it's the gatekeeper. It's also what says, oh, I better stop texting the office and pay 100% attention to what you're saying, because this is important not only for, our business to pay attention to, but me personally and my business health. And that's important. Again, you see that with politicians, and they talk about, the bottom line, and people keep, making ends meet, or that taxes are going to take all of your money. You won't be able to do things. Your kid can't take ballerina lessons, wherever they go with it. And they hit people on that emotional level. And I don't think that we're, putting one over on people if we include that. I think we need to include all of it. And of course, there are people who, if you have something that is not good that you're selling. By the way, I have an asbestos farm I want to bring up at the end and plug for everybody. It's delightful. Everyone should invest. I'm trying to think of the worst thing I could promote. We just grow asbestos all day long. My son grew up with the Lollipop. He works there now. It's a bad choice. No, but we could be selling the wrong thing and be using these techniques. And, I choose not to, help people like that. I mean, if I feel like something, actually, I don't really work with politicians. I work with startups, and I work with people taking businesses public, or companies that want to work in their presentations. And we work with somebody like you also, where they're getting it from every angle on what they need to do. And if they go in, we get to hear the great stories of closing big multi-million-dollar deals. So anyway, yeah, all of this is important.
Yeah, I love that. So do you have time for like 1 or 2 more questions?
Sure. Hit me. We're having fun. Okay.
So I think you've done like a really nice job of helping to communicate the importance of stories. We talk about emotional, make things memorable. If we could sort of jump topics to like media in general, because that's obviously an area of expertise for you. And we started the show asking a little bit about the logistics for setting up these interviews. What would you say to a founder about the importance of getting onto the media tour of some kind? Today's media might be a podcast, it might be a YouTube channel of your own, it could be a guest, it could be conferences. Like, where should they get started? Why should they do it? This help people that have this story they want to get out there and they need to get out there. Help them get started.
So to answer this, I'm going to begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would say, which is, what do we want to do with these interviews and how will they work for us? So I'm going to work backwards up to, then maybe you should go do interviews, media interviews, which these days, yes, it's TV, print, radio, that's traditional. But you have podcasts, and you have blogs, and you have Instagram Live and TikTok. I mean, if I said to you, oh, you can be on your local morning show and 800,000 people might tune in. But if I said on TikTok, 14 million people are going to see you. And they're, oh, well, that one sounds amazing, even though many of us may not understand every last level of that. So when we begin with the end in mind, we have to think, who is our right fit person we're trying to reach? Where are they looking and hanging out? Ideally, we're going there. I mean, you and I could have talked before this, and you'd say, Jess, get me on the Today Show. Oh, I'll make a call to a friend. I'll try to get you on the Today Show. but is that your right fit place? Or is Scott's, and I use Scott as the person, but I was going to say, is Scott's podcast the right place to go to where people really want to consume that information and are saying, how do I make myself better at sales and all of the things that surround it? So we have to figure out, where are they hanging out? Then what is the best way to reach out? I mean, is this a list of, we have 10 outlets that include some amazing podcasts nowadays, and a couple of, but I really want to be in Forbes magazine or Inc magazine. Okay, maybe it's a small list, and you can have someone on your team just plain reach out. You can get those email addresses on the internet or buy a list. There are ways you can do it. Or, so I'm working backwards, or you can work with a publicist or a PR, public relations person, who, has a monthly retainer, and they reach out and you need to ask the questions. So they just kind of putting you any old place. Are you on a radio station in Idaho? Now, I'll tell you how you make use of the interview if you're on a radio station in Idaho and that's not necessarily your target market. The way we get a return on interviews is how we share them and what we do with it after the fact. This is in the 2000s, what you do. The old way was, I was on this show, news in the newspaper, wherever, and my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It doesn't work like that now. They don't ring. There's no hook that you put the phone on. Everything's changed. So what it works now, I said something about phone hanging and putting it on a hook to my kids, and they said like a pirate. Anyway, so the way it works now in the 2000s to get a return on interviews is you need to share it, yes, on social media. You can have organic posts. You can put them in paid advertisements. That's a great place to put it. Talk about the credibility or social proof, and you're giving it visibility. You'd put it on your website. You'd put it in any of your marketing materials that you're handing out to people or investors, and they see. So I mentioned, a radio station in Idaho. Let's say, and we've done this with some clients of ours, let's say it's iHeartRadio, which is everywhere. Well, that's a recognizable brand. Create a really cool graphic. This is something we do in another part of our business. And we create a really cool graphic with their face and the radio interviewer and their topic graphically written on this image. And we marry that to the audio. And now they can put it on their website or social media, in their marketing materials, their email marketing, you name it, so that people could click and hear it, but they see this graphic and it looks really, really great in any of those materials. So to tie a bow on this, you have to begin with the end in mind, know who you want to reach, be super intentional about how you're going to use it, and then find the right person or do it yourself or have someone on your team reach out consistently. And like anything, we're all distracted. So they have to keep reaching out to get a yes. And then once you get the yes, then start sharing and putting it everywhere.
What I appreciate most about what you just said was the last thing that you do is find somebody to help you get on these places, whether you do it yourself or someone else, because I see this over and over and over. I talked to a startup founder that's, doing $300,000 in revenue. And they tell me, we just hired a PR firm and we're paying them $5,000 a month to get us up on blogs and media and all this other stuff. I'm like, great. So why? Well, we just need to brand ourselves. Like, really? You really need to brand yourself if you're at $300,000 in revenue? Or what if, to your point, you're like, why are we doing this? Who do we want to reach? What is the call to action going to be, and work in reverse? Because maybe you don't need to spend $5,000. You can do it yourself a little bit, or maybe you don't have to do it at all because you don't even know the answers to those questions.
Absolutely. And and they have to decide if the answer is, well, we want people to show up on our website or in our marketing materials and see as featured by ABC, NBC, Fox, CBS. Okay, well, if that's the case and they want that instant credibility, and then they read the next thing and hope whatever their claims are correct, they have that social proof, maybe also testimonials. It's another kind of social proof. Yeah, they have to decide. But what tends to happen is they spend $5,000, $10,000 a month. If they're a slightly bigger company, they could spend that. They've been put in a few places. most PR folks don't necessarily tell you how to get a return. So they're not recording the interviews, or they're not helping you with it. They're not creating shareables. And then the person who is paying for it at the end says, I don't even know why I did this.
It
What
felt
happened?
great,
Nothing.
but what happened next? I got nothing out of it.
And actually, after setting that Guinness record, I'm not going to get too promotional, but we have another part of our business is called media ambassadors. And for 80% less than what people pay, we do a program where we guarantee those 4 logos, and we pitch them for an entire year in a pretty unique way, and charge way, way, way less, more around what they might have spent for a month or two of publicity. And all of these things are ripe for disruption. And this is just another area that exploded for us over COVID. Coming full circle, I guess, because I have that Guinness record and people always asked, we said, what would just be a better mousetrap? And people have to decide. I think the biggest piece is whether we're speaking on a stage, we're speaking to the media, or we're speaking on a podcast, what is the point? And by the way, I'll go share this later, or when you share it with me, when it's all ready to go.
Yeah.
And it supports both of us. I'm telling people if they're doing an interview like Scott, like I'm doing with Scott today, being a good interviewee, you share, you let other people know, maybe you make introductions. And then also, if I put it in my locations, people get to hear what I'm up to and get to meet me in some way and say, oh yeah, I like that. And people do. I mean, there's always this feeling we're in silos, and you and I are recording this without, a live studio audience. And so, there's that feeling of like, oh, I don't know who's listening or who's noticing. But people do. And they bring it up, and somebody will reach out to me and email me about that lollipop. And I'll think, when did I tell the story with the lollipop? Oh yeah, that's Scott. Me and Scott.
We'll
which, by the way, I don't
tell
that story all the time.
Lollipops.
What was that?
Lollipops and storytelling.
Why this lollipop will get you the deal. There's your headline.
Lollipop your way to $1 billion company.
That's it. Put it right there in the headline. And
that might be the title of the show. We may have just found it. Well, listen, Jess, you've been so generous with your time and your expertise. I absolutely would love for you to share the best place for people to get some help from you or learn about how you might be able to help them, whether it's through some of the PR work you mentioned, how you help people with their presentations and interviews. Please let the folks know where they can go to learn more about you and your company.
I'm sorry. I'm too busy. They can't get a hold of me. Scott, I'm creating scarcity.
That's right. You can join the waiting list at.
You have to go on a waiting list. Now, I put all the links on a page when I do interviews, and the page is bookjess.com, JESS.
Bookjess.com with 2 S's.
And exactly. I think there's some free stuff there. I think you can get a download of 1 or 2 of the books or some other stuff and social media links. You can go over there. And yeah, I mean, if people want to ask questions or connect with me on social media, just copy and paste my name into the Google, and happy to answer questions.
Cool. Into the Google. Awesome. Well, with just like a minute or 2 left, are there any causes, charities, promotions, anything that you're excited about that you would love for people to learn about? Maybe they haven't heard of it and they should know about it. The floor is yours as we wrap up.
Well, it's funny you should bring that up, because when I was 5 years old, I had a lazy eye. And there's lots of kids who have eye issues and problems. And my mother wrote a children's book. At the time, it was called Jess's Eye Patch. She had it illustrated, and it was this beautiful story. And she was very discouraged because at getting published, because she didn't know what to do. And it was the late 70s, and it sat dormant. And just recently, in the last 6 months, when she turned 75, I helped her find a publisher, and the book is now called The Eye Patch Club. And if people get it, a percentage of the proceeds goes to children's eye charities. And it's a cute story. The main character's name is still Jess, but there are boys and girls in there, and kids who have either had any kind of eye issue, help them. I mean, if people want to just go get the book. it'll help them. And I related that story because it's kind of cute that she finally got published at age 75.
And what was the name of the book and where can people find it?
It's called The Eye Patch Club. You can find it on the Amazon. Sticking with that, you could just go there and type that in, and then a percentage. I think we give 20%. We sometimes give more because she's not really in it for the money. She just was absolutely thrilled that we were able to get that out to the world. So yeah, I appreciate you letting me share that.
Thanks for sharing that. That's really cool. The Eye Patch Club. I think it's probably a good book for even adults to get a copy, just to remind ourselves that everybody's got some.
It's a quick read because it's a children's book.
There you go. So no excuses like, oh, I'm too busy running a company, I don't have time to read. No, get a children's book.
It's mainly pictures, which is the way I still like my books. Now, I would say that if I were a little kid.
Cool.
No, this was an absolute pleasure. I'm super happy that we were able to today. And here's one last thing I just want to leave people with, because I always talk about opening with something big and closing with something big, which is don't get in your own head, people listening. You have to think like an athlete. An athlete would never go out, like a marathoner would never go out and say, it's a little chilly. There are all these people in my personal space. I accidentally brought my slow shoes. They wouldn't say those things and psych themselves out. An athlete would just say, you know what? I've been trained for this my whole life. I'm going to get my game face on. I got this. And that's what I want people to do when you go out for presentations.
I love that, man. I'm so glad you're on the show. Thanks so much for reaching out and asking to be here so that we could share your story and expertise. Definitely want to check out the Eye Patch Club, bookjess.com. And I'm going to read more about the Guinness Book of World Records. I'd love to get the audio files of a couple of those just to see how much they're the same.
We'll come up with, on the break, Scott, when we finish this, we'll come up with a Guinness record for you.
All right. Love it. Well, cool. Thanks for getting me again for being here. And we'll have you back sometime soon, I hope.
Thanks, Scott.
All right. You got it. All right, folks. That's a wrap. That's my conversation with Jess Todtfeld. So excited to have had him on the show. Glad that you enjoyed the show. If you listened this far, it means you listened to the whole thing and you probably enjoyed and we're digging the content. So a couple things I'd love to ask for you. Number one, if this is one of your first episodes and you're not yet subscribed, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Get this feed onto your podcast listening app, whatever you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts or something else, so that every time we pump out new episodes, and we've got lots of great new episodes coming up in the coming months throughout the course of the year, you definitely want to know when those are coming out every single week. Secondly, please tell a friend or 10, flick them a quick text, send them an email, send them a link to this podcast, say, hey, listen to this podcast. I think you'll really like it. One of the best ways to get the word out and help us grow the listenership here and the subscribership for the show still relies on you to tell your friends. And we'd love for you to do that. And finally, if you haven't yet left a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever listening platform where you're catching the show, please go ahead and leave us a review. Tell us how we're doing. Tell us what you like. Tell us what we can do better. And if you have any topics or any guests that you want to recommend to us, please go ahead and let us know, because we do take that stuff very seriously when it comes to planning out the show. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me, and I'm signing off.